Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. The conflict between the United States and Iran has escalated once again, with a second consecutive night of strikes after President Donald Trump declared the ceasefire over and warned Tehran that further attacks could follow. Washington says it has now struck around 90 targets in a second night of strikes on Iran, while Iran's health ministry says 14 people have been killed in the latest attacks. Tehran retaliates against U.S. bases across the Gulf. Military action intensifies even as President Trump insists Iran still wants a deal. Questions are growing over whether diplomacy has collapsed completely or whether a negotiated off-ramp still exists. And joining us now to discuss it all is Nassim AbiGhanem, Middle East expert, Bard College, Berlin. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So a second consecutive night of strikes. Altogether, it's around 170 targets that the Americans struck. The Iranians have also now struck back into the Middle East, and this hasn't happened for quite some time. So are we back to the beginning of this war?
That's a very good question, and to be very honest, and I think we need to also remember that this was never actually a ceasefire agreement or a peace-building agreement. This was only an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, which is a very different path and rarely taken in conflict. So from the nutshell, it was always a very fragile agreement. Even if the memorandum of understanding kind of addressed the key issues to a certain extent. But if we remember also that the major discussions were left for the discussions to continue within the 60 days after signing the memorandum of understanding. So the fragility of it has always been the case. Now, the timing of when these resumptions of attack and violence attacks is the one to put in question, really, given that it has started by Iran in targeting the vessels at the beginning, and to that overlap also with the Khamenei's funeral, does signal a lot of perhaps a disagreement within the Iranian regime. I think the hardliners of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard have acted in a more emotional rather than irrational understanding of what's happening, especially because this memorandum of understanding at its basis serves the interests of the Iranians much more than the U.S. So for them to take the first step in shaping it suggests a more of a posturing or an emotional message sent rather than a rational one.
Mm-hmm. Also, I mean, you mentioned this very unique memorandum of understanding. It wasn't quite the ceasefire, but that's the best that we had at this point in time. But also, I want to ask you about what's happened recently. We've had that NATO summit that's concluded now in Ankara in Turkey. We have a declaration from that. I think it's 6 paragraphs, much said about Ukraine. But on the last one, it does talk about exactly this, about Iran. I just want to read a quick sentence here. It says, allies reiterate that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon and call on Iran to fully respect freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Looking at the sequence, when we read that sentence there, on Tuesday were the projectiles on the tankers, that responded with the Americans with these latest strikes. Is this now in some way also going to involve NATO more? Because it's literally in this paper.
That's true. That was a breakthrough that wasn't existing before when it came to the Iranian issue. And that is, of course, now a situation that is compounded by understanding how Iran can use the Strait of Hormuz as a chokehold on oil, and how the prices of oil can increase by, I mean, at least now we have 5% in 24 hours, which of course affects the European Union particularly as much as anywhere else. And so that has shown a signal that, you know, the Iranian regime doesn't only want to play this game with its proxies across, in particular in Lebanon or somewhere else, but also wants to use those chokeholds. So that has been a new turn and something to look into. Especially that now there was the difference between now and back then is that now there was actually something presented to the Iranians in this MOU, which does lift a lot of sanctions, gives some money, in return, no more blocking the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear power. And if these concessions have been given already and still are not enough for the Iranian regime, that is when everyone starts to get a little bit more frustrated, and the likelihood that they can come around against this, especially with the NATO, starts to increase. And that cannot be in Iran's favor. But Iran seems to want to push this to its limit as much as possible, and to see what is it that, what point would this actually happen, whereby the NATO and the US and also the Israelis would ally on this. And it seems now it has realized that it is coming close to that point.
Mm-hmm. Also, I mean, we're seeing images there. I mean, this is, of course, at a time when there are these funeral processions in Iran, many people, civilians out. I mean, right now, these strikes seem to have concentrated on missile systems, military sites, but also, I believe, bridges. So when we have this as well, we've also seen banners of certain Iranians calling for death of Trump, etc. I mean, this is a very precarious situation. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, we still have civilians very much on the ground. These the process of this funeral is more or less concluded. But where does this escalate, and what do the Iranian people? How are they going to react to all this?
Yeah, I mean, so this we have to also remember that what Khamenei represents is not just a supreme leader in terms of head of a state, but also a religious symbol and a religious reference for many Shiites across the world. And so the civilians are always going to feel these extra emotions about it, because it does remind them of what, they didn't have the space to believe it and understand it fully, because it happened on the first day in March, and then there was continuous war where they had to shield and secure themselves to safety. And now it's a kind of a reminder, and it will turn into a national symbol for the Iranians, of course, and that symbol in their struggle. So, of course, it will galvanize, it will strengthen the regime in certain aspects. Nevertheless, again, what is presented for the Iranians has been already deemed in their favor more than actually in the favor of the US or Israel. And then Netanyahu was very clear on how this wasn't a very good deal. And a lot of experts have already analyzed that. And that lifts a lot of the economic burden on the people. Now, if they also see that this is slightly and bit by bit also taken away from them, again, then it might be a different situation for the people. But we have to remember there's likelihood that the hardliners within the civilian society as well, who are very strongly in support of the regime, will always be there, and they exist, and they're not a small constituency, even if there were protests in Iran. It's a very big country with a very large population. So when we think of 20 or 30 million attending this funeral, this is more or less an expected number. However, again, returning into a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, returning into, withdrawing all the benefits that come from the MOU, putting the sanctions back, would start to affect the civilians' economic situation even more. And then that would also be something that the regime is thinking about. Now they might have had a bit of a relief seeing the number of people showing up and feeling that the regime is intact. But everything that has happened, the Iranians could not have gotten any better deal. Mm-hmm. And so will they want to risk losing it now just for the vengeance or the emotional resentments that exist because of the assassination of Khamenei?
Right. And also one of these central tenets has been, and also in that NATO declaration, is the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen already Brent crude, the oil prices climbing back around $80 a barrel. I mean, we've observed this before. So where do we stand now with the Strait of Hormuz? And also, curious. I mean, at the moment, we don't have any, let's say, direct indications yet with strikes from Iran into Israel at all, or Israel being part of any new strikes at all. So just get your quick comment on both those.
Yes, that's an extremely important question and a very solid observation. And under that, we need to also look at the leverage points that the Iranians still hold. And it seems that the Iranians, bit by bit, have lost the one in Lebanon. And so the one that they're trying to keep hold of is the one in Strait of Hormuz. The negotiations between the Lebanese government and the Israeli government are ongoing. There's a framework that sets some work in south of Lebanon. There's continued talks in Rome on the 15th to the 16th of July. And of course, that is also overlapping with a stronghold of the Israelis, the IDF in south of Lebanon. And it seems the proxy of Iran, Hezbollah, is not able to properly resist this time. So bit by bit, it looks like this leverage point is being lost as a card in Iranians' hand. So what is really truly left for them is the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to see that again pushed to its maximum, and for the Iran to try to gain as much as possible through this one. And I'm afraid that this will also be the only one left and the only one to be used mostly, and that will affect again crude price, oil, and all other inflation that could come with it.
Yeah, so major impacts there, and another 2 days of consecutive strikes. Both sides, the Americans and the Iranians, trading blows. Thanks for all those insights. Was our guest here, Nassim AbiGhanem. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.